Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll give everybody a chance to start loading in. I do have the public chat enabled today, so if you are having any problems, be sure to send a chat message in. I'll keep a look on that panel. Also, the Q&A is there, so if you do have any questions as we go through today's presentation, then please be sure to enter those there, and I'll check that as we get near the end of today. I'm definitely going to leave time to talk about answer questions. So today, the topic today, we're going to talk about how to convert a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet into an interactive dashboard using Yurbi. And this is a pretty common use case, and we'll talk about that why. But we're going to actually go through and do a lot of hands-on. I'm going to show you. I mean, we're going to do it today live, and you're going to see just some of the best practices and how best to do it. In fact, let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to talk about how to prep that Excel worksheet. That's probably the most important thing, is to get the Excel in the right format, and we'll talk about what that format is. We're going to do the import, go over the best ways and the best practices involved in that. Number 3 is a very important step on how to enhance that using our Yurbi App concept in the Architect tab. So you'll see that if you're not familiar with Yurbi, you'll see all this as we go through the demo. And then we're going to build some reports. We'll build a quick dashboard, talk about how you update the data and things like that, and then go into any Q&A. And I'm recording this, so anyone who registered for this webinar will get this link automatically. If you do get it and you're watching the replay, which I know many of you do, if you do have any questions after, just email me. I'll give you my contact information again, but david.ferguson@5000fish.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, even after after the replay. So, who am I? I'm the founder and CEO of 5000 Fish. 5000 Fish is the company behind Yurbi, which is the product we're talking about today, and I'll let you see all the other little cool details I put about myself. I even put the little emojis on there this time. I'm having some fun with this particular slide. But many of you have worked with me in the past. If you're not, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I hope you contact me after the webinar so we can talk maybe about your requirements with dashboards. Now, as I mentioned, those who are not familiar with Yurbi, our concept is we're combining the ease of self-service business intelligence. So we've built a platform that's designed for business users, and we're combining that with the power of enterprise tools and enterprise technology. So we've got a lot of security, we've got a lot of data governance, auditing, we got a lot of power in the platform. We're not going to go over all of that today. We're going to be very focused on just this use case of importing Microsoft Excel, but you can kind of see some of the things that we cover in our platform, and our goal is to make it affordable, so that companies of all sizes can have the ability to have this kind of technology and to grow your business. So that's really what kind of separates us, is our ease with our security. And we don't send out a lot of emails, but I would recommend that you do follow us on our social media accounts, because that's where we put out all the notices about the upcoming webinars and all the new blog posts. We take a very educational, informational type approach with our blog, and we put all those out on our social media accounts. So whether you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, we're starting a new YouTube account where we're going to put a lot of these replays of our webinars. Definitely follow us there, and you'll get all of our latest updates, because we do try not to email a lot, and quite frankly, most emails these days go right into the junk folder. So I like to start with a little bit of a cartoon, and I'm not going to read this. You can read it on the screen. I'll leave it on there long enough. But everybody loves Dilbert. Dilbert has a great pulse on our businesses these days, and a lot of us rely on Excel. Excel is the #1 business intelligence product in the world. That's not something I'm making up. That's an actual statistic, because honestly, Microsoft Office and Microsoft Excel is pervasive. It's very easy to use. It's easy to create a spreadsheet, but there's a lot of problems with it. I mean, one of the bigger ones being, as in the last cell here, you basically have a formula pointing to the wrong cell or bucket of cells, and that throws off all your data, and you're making decisions off of bad information. And and I love how the boss here says numbers don't lie, and that is when it comes to Excel, that's definitely not the case. So even though Excel is great, it does have problems in terms of the human error aspect we just talked about. Bigger though, it's challenging to keep everybody on the same page. So one of the real advantages when you bring that into an interactive web-based dashboard like Yurbi, you have one place everybody in the organization go see the most current data as long as you refresh it. And we'll talk about that. But you're not emailing and people finding, what's the latest Excel spreadsheet in my email? What do I look at? What do I accidentally edit? You know, just a lot of confusion when you're running a team or you're running decisions based on Excel. And I've talked to lots of organizations that have really elaborate processes where they spend quite a long time at the end of each month putting together these Excel based dashboards that they've created and emailing them out to a large number of people. And in many cases, they have to do multiple versions of it just to do things like security. So it's very, very time consuming. That last bullet point there, a lot of manual labor, lot of effort. That's money, and that's really the problem with Excel. So once you get to a certain point, you really want to bring that into a real dashboard solution. And I think we've built a couple of use cases here that makes that really easy and powerful to do. So let's go ahead and get to it. I told you we're gonna really focus on the hands-on portion of this today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to share my entire screen because we're going to be looking at Excel spreadsheets and doing a whole bunch of things. So let me minimize. Now, if anybody, and ignore my calendar there, if anybody doesn't see my screen, please put a chat in. I'll check that every once in a while. So let's talk about Excel. There's a couple different ways that we work with raw data. Now, one is being a CSV file. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'm really going to focus on Excel, and the other being Excel. One of the biggest things you want to do is put that Excel in the right format, and that generally means in a raw data structure. Let me give you an example of what's not a good format first. I'll open this example. This is actually a live example that I've received in the past. Let me open that up there. There we go. I'll make it a little bit bigger so everybody can see. Everybody kind of knows how you build Excel. You pop things in quadrants on a worksheet, and then you reference all the things within the cell. So you'll have things that look like this. I mean, you'll have little segments of data here, another little cross segment here, and you'll have everything on one spreadsheet. This is not going to work for a database import process because it's just not in a good format for a database format. You've got there's no real rhyme or reason that you could automate this, and you've got a lot of extra things like extra information. You've got columns here with headers. You might have subtotals and totals. You might have charts pasted in here. You might have pivot tables. You might have a lot of things in your Excel. So this is generally, if anything looks like this, we're going to have to rework it and reformat it. Now, the easiest thing to do is just to do that manually and to build yourself a nice template. I'll show you how that looks in a second. But if the format of your Excel is so hard-coded and so complicated you don't want to touch that, Excel has a really powerful macro Visual Basic for Applications, VBA programming language, which can go in, and if this is a pretty static sheet here, they can go in and grab things and put them in right formats and do data cleansing and really automate that for you. So that's always the phased approach that we talk about, is that if you want to automate the Excel process, you could do that through Visual Basic VBA programming, and we have services for that, and there's lots of ways you can do that. Now I'm going to minimize this one, and I'm going to show you how I modified that particular one. This will actually be the data sample that we work with today. So you'll notice what I did is each one of those little quadrants of information, I converted into its own workbook or worksheet. Let me zoom into this. So you'll notice that I've got one header row, very important. You don't want any, extra lines above your list of headers. I've got no blank columns. Again, very important. Every column is full. and I've got no blank rows. So what I'm getting to and the way I want my Excel structured is just raw data, um, columns and rows. Now you'll also notice that, and the data that was in that original spreadsheet is fine, but if you look at my headers, you'll see how I've got underscores instead of spaces. That's not required. We've got a lot of logic in Yurbi to kind of process special characters. So if you do have spaces and asterisks and parentheses and all sorts of weird things, backslashes, you'll be amazed what we put in our header rows and when we label our columns. They won't break anything, but as you get into more powerful applications and start to write formulas and things like that, they can be somewhat confusing and can cause issues. For example, requiring you to put things around quotes and things like that. So what I always recommend is keep your naming convention of your column headers just really simple, and just simplify them. Use an underscore for spaces and keep them all. Try to take away reserved characters like an asterisk or parentheses or things like that that might be interpreted in a programming language as something special. But you'll notice that right here inside the actual rows, I've got a number sign here. That's no problem. I've got dates here. That's no problem at all. You want those sorts of things. But in your header row, keep it simple. You'll also notice that what I did is I put my task in this first workbook. I made another spreadsheet, another sheet for another one of those tables, status and manager. So very, very easy, clean layout. And some of the things I always recommend as you're copying and pasting and doing this, you'll be amazed how easy it is to copy and paste and add blank lines and do weird things in Excel. I always like to just highlight a couple columns at the end and just say delete. And even though it doesn't look like I'm deleting anything, if there are any blank things there, by just doing that, that's going to get rid of any extra rows at the bottom so that those won't come in with zeros or null values that could potentially mess up things. So this is how I would structure my template, and I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, before I load this in, I want to look at one more thing. I'm going to go back and open up the original. One of the things that's nice about this particular data source as I'm working with it, even though these are four different things, one of the things you'll notice in Excel is we tend to almost set things up like databases anyhow. Things relate to other things. So you'll see, for example, that I have a task status 3112, and you'll see there's a status table here where 3 equals completed and 2 equals progress and 1. So that's a nice, easy way if you set your Excel up. You don't have to do this, by the way, but I'm just saying if you have this is a nice, logical way. So what I want to point out is that every one of those worksheets that I set up in this Excel sample, let's go back to that one, all these worksheets relate to each other. I've got the status, the type, and the manager, and I've got the type here, the translates type, I've got the status here, and I've got the manager section here. So they all kind of relate to each other. And even on these other worksheets, I would just kind of select and delete all the blanks just to make sure I don't have any blanks. And I've already done it in this case. The last thing that I would recommend you do in Excel is just take a look at the formatting of your columns. The other thing about Excel, Excel will allow you to show things, to see things a certain way, and you think it's a number or you think it's a date, but it's not. If you have an error in your data and you maybe have a character by mistake, a typo in a field or column that you think is supposed to be numeric, then Excel will at that point treat everything kind of as a character. So one common thing to do is kind of the format at the column level and just take a look and see how you have those things set. By default, most of them will have no formatting whatsoever, which leaves Excel to kind of guess what it is. If it's a date, you can kind of come in and set explicitly what that date would be. If it was see, if I were to grab these here and look at the formatting of the cells, let's see if there's any, you'll see it's just general, which is typically what you'll see. If you want that to be a number or you want that to be currency or some sort of accounting or date or time, I would recommend that in Excel you set that up to have those formats. Now I'll show you in Yurbi how we could fix that. It's not a huge problem, but you're going to see how it streamlines things so much easier if you do that in advance. All right, so that covers kind of the Excel prep. Let me go ahead and close these files down. Let me take a peek just to see if there's any questions. Nope, we're good. So now let's go and log into Yurbi and take a look at how we import this. So now I'm going to use a pretty clean system. It's going to have some stuff already in there, but I deployed this one just for this training session. I'll log in as Yurbi. And you'll notice that I don't have any dashboards at all set up on this particular user account. So we're going to set one up from scratch as we go through this webinar. Now, to get the actual data imported, you do require administrative access in Yurbi. Because we consider that a data source, we don't allow anybody to just import Excel because it is going to load data into the database. So you do require an administrator to set it up the first time. After it's set up, you can do everything in terms of updating it from an architect perspective. So we'll talk about that. So I'm going to pop into my admin section. And I'm going to go straight to app databases. And if you're familiar with Yurbi, of course, this is where you would register any kind of data source, like a database. This is also where you can register your Excel or CSV data. So I've got a couple here, but I'm going to register a brand new app. I'm going to start from scratch, do all this from the beginning. And you'll see one of the options here is Excel or CSV. So this will work for either of those cases. So I'm going to pick that. Very first thing you want to do is give it an app name. Now you can always change this name for users after the fact. It's not super critical, but you want to give it a user-friendly name, sort of a descriptive name. So I'm going to call this task database. Even though it's an Excel spreadsheet, I'm going to call it a database, and I'll call it task database for webinar, just as a description. Next. And on this next screen, this is where we're going to choose our file. And we're going to select if it has a header row. And we do highly recommend you always have a header row in your Excel. You don't have to. That's why we have the option here, but it does make things a lot faster and easier. So I'm going to go ahead, go back out to my desktop, and I'm going to pick that. Now, one thing I did not mention that's very important for the Excel prep is you do want it to have the extension XLSX. That's essentially the latest version of Excel. That's a workbook, so you can have those multiple sheets in there. You don't want it to be a macro. You don't want it to be just XLS. You do want the format of your spreadsheet to be saved as XLSX, and then you'll see that one is there. So I'm going to pick that one that we were looking at, and I am going to check that box to say that it contains a header row, and I'm going to click the upload button. Now this upload very fast. What we're doing is we're bringing that in, and we're going to show you like about the first 100 records in that sheet, so you can kind of get an example set of data. Now right away you'll know that date. You'll see that date looks a little different. This is actually how it was set up in Excel, but the display was set a little differently. But the good news is it is a date time field, so we don't have to do anything special there. But the purpose of this stage is for you to go through and kind of make sure that all of your fields are set up with the right data type. So you'll notice that as I click a column here, you'll see I click this column, and now that shows in the task sequence as a column name. I've got a couple settings here. And this is to validate and to do checking of your data before you bring it in. First thing is you'll see by default, this is set up as a real data type. If I bring this down, we can set things as a string. That's going to be most of your things that are character based. A real, that's going to be most things that have like a decimals. So currency, anything with a decimal typically is going to be real, or any kind of really large number. Big int is your integer, so that's going to be things without decimals. Check 1 through 10. You don't have any 1.1s, 1.2s. Date time, and then time by itself. So you want to make sure that each column is set up on the right sort of data type. And then you'll notice I just switched that to string. The reason it's important is if it's currency, of course I want it to be a real number. I want to use it as a currency. I want to do sums. I want to add it up like numbers. If it's a string field, if it's going to ever have characters in it, I want to treat it as a string, or I'm going to get all kind of errors in my database. But it also plays a role in sort orders. Do you want to sort this field numerically, or do you want to sort this field character based? Now, these things you can fix later, you can change later. It's just nice to set it up because as we set this up, and I'm going to change this back to a reel. As we set this up, we're setting up, Yurbi's going to remember this. So as we import new things in the future, we won't have to go through and do this again. So that's why we want to take the time and kind of set it up right. Now, after we set our data type, this is called validation option. So this is going to do some checking if, of course, you have the validate checkbox checked there, which we recommend. And that's going to take a look at not just these 100 records, but the entire sheet that you're uploading and see if everything in that column is possible to be a real number. Maybe you have a mistake down the line and you have an accidental character, some cells misaligned or something like that, and you've got some characters in there. There's a couple things you can do. You can null it out, which is useful if you're doing like a date time string, and a zero wouldn't make sense if it's a date or a time, but if you just blank it out, that might be okay. If it's a number, you put a zero in there. That's generally your default number, default option on numbers. Or you can just error, meaning kill the process, don't even import it. Let me go back and see what's wrong with my sheet that I'm importing and fix it. So the validation options are pretty important. And on a reel, I tend to say make it a validation option of 0. And include just means, do you even want to include this column? Now, I would say if you don't want to include the column, delete it out of your template, delete it out of the spreadsheet you're importing. But in some cases, that's not feasible because you're using that as a reference column, or for whatever reason, you don't want to mess up your process of your initial template. You can opt to not bring it into the database by including it or false or true here. Now, once you click on that and you set that up, you hit the update button, and then that tells Yurbi at that point that that is always. So let's click. That's going to be a string. That's fine. These are reals. I might go in and change those to integers, but I don't really. It's not that important. Task, I want to make sure it's a date. It is. So if all these match, I don't have to do anything. And you'll notice that I had multiple sheets. So that's where I want to do this operation. I want to go across all my sheets. Real, string, and string. Strings are really easy. Anything can be a string, and strings really have no validation per se. Even though it says error, the only time it'll really error on a string is if you have a blank row. Real, string, and string. So everything looks fine on the rest of my columns. Now you can imagine that this could be a very long. I mean, I've imported spreadsheets with like 70 columns, and that gives you a lot of stuff to click through. That's why if you do set those formats up in Excel before you do this, then you can pretty much assume it's going to be right because we're going to read those Excel formats. This is really useful when you have things set up incorrectly in Excel. So that's why that Excel prep is important. Last thing I'm going to do is hit the process button. And that's going to go through and validate everything again. And it's going to import, it's going to create the tables and import anything. You'll see that happen really fast. Now I'm going to show you a sheet here in a second. I had about 537,000 rows that I downloaded. And it took me an hour and 10 minutes to do that. Roughly about 8,000 rows per minute was the rate at which this uploaded. And that's going to depend a little bit on your server power and things like that. We're using your server memory. So if you have a very low memory server, you might even have to break big files up into chunks. But my server, I think it has, I think that one has 3.7 gigs of memory, which is really the minimum that we recommend for Yurbi. And it had no problem doing over 500,000 records in a spreadsheet. And again, it did take about an hour and 10 minutes, about 8,000 rows per minute on that. So we sped that up quite a bit because we do have some bigger use cases. Now you'll notice that went really fast because that was a small spreadsheet. If I were to refresh, let's go back to admin and go back into app databases. What you'll see happen is there's my task database now. It took everything that was in that particular spreadsheet and it imported it into a database. In this case, the database that Yurbi is connected to. So Yurbi is using a Microsoft SQL. If I was using a PostgreSQL embedded database, it would import it into that. But you do also have the ability to kind of set and define where you want that Excel data to be imported into. But what we did at that process is we converted that into a database format. And that's why it's very important to go ahead and make sure that all your Excel rows and columns are set up correctly. You'll see if I want to change that display name I talked about, I would just change it there. So very easy to kind of update some of that stuff. Now, what happened as I imported that into the database is we automatically created what we call a Yurbi app. So I go into the architects, and then we've moved on to the part of the agenda where we talk about how to make this a lot better. But just to show you what it did, each one of those spreadsheets in that workbook came across as a report type. So you'll see here task, task manager, status, and manager. Let's bring that Excel back in for a second and bring that file back open. And you'll see those mirror the names of my worksheets. What does that mean? Well, if you want to speed up the process of things, have a nice descriptive name on your worksheet. You'll notice I've got spaces. That's not a problem. Everything comes in fine. So now if I were to look at tasks, for example, it automatically creates a folder and brings in all those column headers into your report tree automatically. If I look at task type, you'll see the same thing. So every one of those worksheets were automatically brought in as a report type, and what all those column headings were brought in just as they were. So we'll talk about what we're going to do in this architect in a second, but I want to just quickly go into the builder and show you that immediately we could start building reports. If I were to go and pick the task database, which is what we named it, you'll see my report types. If I click on task, I can use that report type and I can just start bringing in those fields. And this will start to give me a nice preview of exactly what was in that spreadsheet. You'll see everything was imported 100%. So very seamless from that perspective. You'll see my date comes in and it's a task date. It's got that timestamp associated with it, which you did not see in Excel. And we'll talk about that, some of the things that you can fix up in your architect process. So once that is imported and you've got that database table defined, you've got your template set up, you don't have to be an administrator anymore. You could grant someone architect access if they needed permission to update that data. We'll talk about that in a second. Or you could just go straight into assigning your report builders and your report viewers, your report agents, in terms of who can build from that app and who can view reports from that app. Let's go back to the architect and show you a couple things I recommend you do, and also why I went with that workbook and that multiple spreadsheet model. Because imagine that I could have done the same thing. I could have made 4 separate spreadsheets for that, but instead I put them all into one workbook, and I'll show you why that was important. So let's bring back up. I'm back in the architect. One reason you'll see immediately it just made those four things for me, 4 report types. They're not super useful, however. I mean, this would be great if they were all separate sets of data, but as I showed you earlier, they have relationship. Tasks are related to task types, related to status, related to manager. There's a relationship there. And this is one of the really bigger values of the way we do Excel handling in Yurbi. I can take my main report type here, task, and you'll notice I've got my database view. It brought in just one single table here. If I expand that, you'll see how that all those real values, date time values, character values, all those things are now set up in the database. That's why we went through that process initially. But you'll notice I'm 1008 is my database app number here. What I can actually do is go into the database and I can add all those other spreadsheets into one report type, because there is a relationship there that I want to leverage. So you'll see if I go down to where my 1008 is, I've got all 4 of those report types represented by a separate table. Every time you upload a spreadsheet, we're going to create a separate table in the database for that. So now let's go ahead and bring in manager, for example. Now I'll just give it a little alias. Again, you don't need to be too fancy with your aliases. I just typically keep them to 3 to 5 letter abbreviation. Let's bring in our task type. And I'll just call that TT. I mean, you can really keep these simple. These are only going to be used for as Yurbi builds the the data the SQL queries, and status, I'll go ahead and just put status. So you'll see that now in my database view, I've added the other three report types, the other three things. And if you remember, there's a relationship that can be made between these. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select my task, and I'm going to select my manager, and I want to build that relationship. So this is just like you're building a relationship between a database, but we're doing it now on Excel tables. And in this case, I want to say that my manager sequence is equal to my manager sequence. And I'm going to save that. Generally, you're going to use left joins. If you need any of this might look like a total rocket science to some. It might look like something super easy to others. If you need any assistance at all, that's where our customer support team comes in. We can help you do this. And again, this is something you set up once. And once you have it set up, you don't have to touch again. Task and task type. Let's go ahead and build a relationship there. My test type is going to be my type. You'll see left join. I'll save that. You'll notice after I save it, there's a little join clause here. That's what I want to see. I'm going to go ahead and make the last one to status. And that's going to be my status sequence is going to be to my status. So I just knew that from looking at the raw data that those columns were kind of the association there. And that's what's nice is I can build these application level associations here. So I've got that done. Now the last step is I want to go ahead and now add more descriptive things in my folder here. And I'm just going to keep it simple. I'll select the task folder. I'll go under manager and I'll just add the manager department. I would normally give it a friendly display name and do things like that, but I'm not going to worry about that for sake of time. I'm just going to go through and pick the type description and put that in there. And I'm going to go through and pick the status and put the status description in there. So I'm just adding these to my field. I'm going to come back and add one more, but I want to show you the reason I did this so you understand this a little bit better. Now, when I go to build, I have a very simple way to cross-reference all that data and leverage all the power of Yurbi. If I go to task, that's where I added those. You'll see I've got those extra fields now. And then if I were to do something like bring me in the task code and the date, now these are just numbers. If I bring in task status, that's just a number. That doesn't really mean anything to me. But if I bring in status description, I've got the actual description of that now. I'm building a relationship behind the scenes, and Yurbi is actually able now to bring me things like the status, the type, the manager, without having to guess what those number represents. And that's really the power of bringing them together in that one app is I can bring them all in a single data set like this really quickly. If I didn't do it this way, I would have to do linked reports and advanced reports, and things would be more complicated. But this is the power of Excel, is you can bring in those multiple spreadsheets. And if the spreadsheets have relationships like a customer ID or some relationship between the spreadsheets like a purchase order number or a task order number, then you can tie them together in the Architect. The last thing I want to show in the Architect is how you can also enhance the data. So for example, we talked about this date field. It's nice, but it's got a timestamp there that we don't necessarily want. But we know that for the types of reports that we're going to create, we want to look at things by the month, maybe the year, maybe the week number, and things like that. So let's pop back in the Architect and I'll show you again quickly how you can enhance that data once you've got it imported. None of this has to go back and change that template that we built. That template is done. And if I wanted to, I could delete these other report types since I've got everything I need under task, but they're useful. That might be something where you edit the name of them and give a better description so your builders know kind of what they're there for or their purpose. But let's pop under task here. I'm going to go back and add a date again. So even though I have a date, I'm adding the date again because what I'm going to do is put in this is going to be my date month. And I can do things like write actual SQL functions and dot task underscore date. And I just got really technical on you just then. What I did is, and I'm going to change, well, this is going to be a name, so it's going to be a character still. Instead of referencing an actual SQL field, the SQL field in this case is task dot task date. How do I know that? Well, task underscore date is the name of the field. And then task is my parent table alias. See that right there? And I just put those things together to make a SQL reference. Again, this is where, again, this is architect. So this is an IT function when you get into data architecture. So if this is above your head, our support team can help you. If you don't have an IT person on your staff that can help you, this is, we have years of experience on any type of database to help you with this. But what I'm doing is an actual SQL function. And I'm translating that date. I'm telling it to translate that date into a name, and the name is going to be MM, which means the full month name. Now, how do I know these types of things? Well, Microsoft has a whole on Microsoft SQL database. They give you all the functions. They give you all of that. But if you don't know it, just ask us, and we can help you with these things. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and you'll see that that's going to add a new field called task date underscore MON, which will give me my month name. And then on that date, I'm going to edit that because by default now it's a date type and it's got that timestamp at the end. I'm going to change my data type. I'm going to change it to just date part only. So again, this is architect stuff. It might be a little bit more advanced than you might want to get into, but the good thing is you only do it once. Once you do it, the power behind that Excel just magnified 10 times. So now let's go take a look at the builder and see what we did. We can actually start to build reports now. I'm done with the architect if you glossed over a little bit on that. Let's go back and pick our app, pick our report type, and look at those two new fields we added. First, let's add in task sequence. Let's add in the date. You'll see my date now no longer has that timestamp, and I'm showing date part only. So I've changed the output of that, which is more user-friendly. Let's go ahead and add in that formula I added. Look at that. It's doing a calculation on that date, and it's giving me what the month is. And again, that could be really useful. I didn't have to go back and add that column into Excel. I could make that a part of my Excel spreadsheet. I could use a formula in Excel to do that, but I'm just showing you that you have the power in Yurbi to kind of enhance that Excel even more, the architect, without having to modify and keep those things up in your actual Excel template. So now let's go ahead and make a couple of reports. First, let's make just a detailed report. I'm going to bring a couple fields in here. Task code. Let's bring in the manager, the type. Let's bring in all our fields. So let's have one complete kind of report there. So you'll see now I've got my sequence, I've got my dates, I got my month, code, manager, type, description, everything. I'm going to go ahead and save this report. That's as simple as you can make a report. I'll just call this my target report, and I'll make it available to all users. I'm going to save that in my public library, and let's put it, let's add a folder, and I'm going to call this folder webinar. Won't go through all the things I could do there, and I'm going to save it in that particular subfolder that I created. All right, so now I've got my first report just like that. That report doesn't have any real interactivity. Of course, if I look at that report, I can go in and do all of my kind of filtering and dragging and dropping and looking at things from that perspective. So of course it's interactive. But we're not actually going to put that report on our dashboard. I'm going to make a couple now charts and KPIs, and we'll set this up to be the drill down so that when somebody clicks on a report, it'll drill down there. All right. So now let's do a brand new report. And let's start from scratch. So I'm going to bring in task sequence. Let's bring in our date. Let's bring in our month. And let's bring in our manager. And let's count up how many. So now on these objects, I'm going to go into criterion formula. I'll add a formula. I'm just going to say count up how many tasks I have by manager and by month. That's going to be kind of the goal of this report. And let's go ahead, and I'm going to keep the task data in. I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to turn off visibility just to kind of show you what I've got here. And you'll notice that I've got, and let's change my label here to be number of tasks. I want to just report of how many tasks do I have. I'm not going to pay attention to if they're open or closed at this point. I just want to know how many they have. And you can kind of see I've got the beginnings of that. But I'm going to make this even more logical by popping it into a pivot table where I put my month name as my column and my managers on my row. I could turn this into a drill down. I might come back and do that in a second, but for now, let's just see what we've got. And you'll notice that I've got now something that looks pretty good, but you'll see that my months are out of order. That's why I put that task date in there. Watch this. I'm going to go ahead and do a sort order on that. Let's see if ascending will do it. Yes. And now I've got January, February, March. So I wanted to get those months in the right order from that perspective. So I left that task date in there to put the sort on it, but I turned the visibility off. I didn't need to actually see that data. Now let's make this interactive by making it a drill down. So I'm going to pop into that pivot again and go to this screen that I skipped and select the target. And that's why we built that target report first, is we wanted that to be where users drill down. So I'm going to select target report that we had built. You'll see that it put it there for me. And the key is I want to make sure that every field in my parent report that I'm connecting to is also in that target report. So in this case, I want to map my month name to the month name, and I want to map my manager department to that manager department. So I'm good in this particular case. Hit finish. And now you'll notice that those little numbers look like little hyperlinks. That's because they are. They're drilled down. I got a drill down pivot table at this point, and I'm going to go ahead and pop that into a chart. And probably anytime I have a date, like a month or something like that on my x-axis, I'm going to use a line chart typically. And let's go ahead. Now, here's a really important tip. You'll notice that I have 3 months of data. Now, if I just go through and build this chart, let's actually do it. Let's call this number of tasks by manager. And actually, this is just by month. And I could put on some of my features. I'll show a legend. And let's hit next and take a look at this chart. All right. So I've got my chart here. I only have a little bit. I probably want to switch my orientation. Notice how my months are in my legend here, and I've got my managers on my x-axis. That's why I wanted to do that. I want to kind of show you what the purpose of this first screen is. I want my legend information to be shown there. So now I've got that in rows. The next thing I want to do, now this is again, you got to think about, if you're familiar with Excel, then this is a concept that's pretty natural to you, is this range here. This is a range of a table. C1, this is your 1 to 1 is the top part of your table. 4 rows, 3 columns. Now, if you're going to update this on a regular basis, you probably want to display about 12 months worth of history eventually. You want to show a full year. You can make this 12, even though we don't have that data in there yet. You're future proofing your output here, so you never have to come back and edit this chart and add when you do April or when you do the other months. So even though I made that 12, let's take a look at my chart now. I'm still just going to show January, February, and March, but what we're going to do is I'm going to update this data set, put some April in there for you, and April will be in column 4, but we're good all the way up to column 12. So that's just a little best practice on how you set these things up so you don't have to go back and kind of worry with them again. So let's finish that. And as you know, this is a drill down. If I were to click on this 4 dot here, it's going to actually take me into those particular 4 tickets. Let's hit preview and get back to my chart. So I've got exactly what I want in this particular chart. So I'm going to go ahead and save this report, and it's going to be task by manager by month as an example. Now notice we are taking a little extra time here. So I was going to make one more report, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to just use this one. But you could go through and then make a KPI and do other things and make as many reports as you want just like this, and it's going to work the same way. I mean, that's what's nice, is I've got live real-time report building capabilities here. Now, one more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to add a prompt on my date. I do want to do that since I'm not going to do the other report. I'm going to go into my date and add criteria. And this again is where we're going to add some more interactivity. That's what we're doing here. We're making an interactive dashboard. And I'm going to say prompt for value and let the person pick their date range as they do it. I could do it on the date range, or I could do it on the actual month name. I'm going to do it on date range. Let's go ahead and save that report. And in this case, you'll notice I'm going to overwrite the existing report. All right, so I've got a nice report. If I come to the library, let's just run that report from the library first. I'll click on it. There's a report we just built. It's going to prompt me for that time slice. That's what that prompt. So I have some interactivity there. I'm going to skip that and just bring back everything because we've only got 3 months worth of data. You'll see that. I would probably go back into my chart and change up my axis labels and things like that. But if I were to click on what's these 3 tickets that sell, 3 tasks that sales had, I can click on that and it'll drill me down into that information. I can go backwards. I can get to a prompt panel. I can change my time slice. I've got a lot of interactivity in the library by itself. So that's nice. But let's go ahead and build a quick dashboard. And again, I was going to do another report, but for the sake of time, I think this is time well spent to cover a lot of that background information. Let's go ahead and create a dashboard. Create this. I'll just call this task database example webinar. And I'm going to save it in that same location. You can save it anywhere, your private library, your public library, make a new folder under public library. I'm going to save it right there under that same folder. I can give my same set of permissions. I could do all sorts of, we're going to cover permissions and things like that in another webinar, but there's just a lot of power in how you can control who has access to view versus modify and all sorts of things like that. And then we've got our dashboard and we just have to add a widget. And in this case, we only really have one report that we're going to add, and I'll just call it task by manager and month. We're just going to pick that one report that we had, which honestly is 2 reports because you've got to drill down. Now, as we add this to the dashboard, because we added that date prompt, the actual dashboard builder can set like a default value. I'm going to select remember, and that's going to save a default value of this dashboard. In this case, the default value is going to be a skip, meaning bring back all the data. And I'll show you why that's important. It's part of that interactive dashboard nature of Yurbi. The reason we call it Yurbi is because your business intelligence is all about personalization. And there, we just built the dashboard. And I would just add a widget and repeat that process to go through and do more if I did have more. In fact, just to have another thing on this dashboard, I'm going to leverage one of my other reports in the library. Let's take a look and see if okay, let's bring in this KPI on product quality. Again, it had some prompts, so I'll just answer those prompts. I'm just going to skip and bring back everything. And you'll see I've got a nice little KPI. And I just wanted to do that just to add something else on the dashboard. You'll notice that I can shrink these things up now. I can drag and arrange them how I want. I tend to put my KPIs up top and my chart at the bottom. So it's very easy to build these dashboards. Now, the power now is that from a user perspective, they could do a couple things. One, right from the dashboard, they can click drill down. That's one interaction piece. And as they click the drill down, they're at a detailed view because that's our target report. Our target report could be anything. It could have been another chart. It could be a visualization. It could be a link to an external web page. Lots of things I could do there. And within this now, I can use all my normal Yurbi services such as a date hierarchy filter and quickly get down maybe just to these 2 days if I wanted to. Let's go ahead and clear that out. I can, do that with a Boolean search type of filter if it's a string field. These came in as numbers. So you'll see that I've got less than, greater than. So that's what I mentioned. Do you want to sort and search things numerically or alphanumerically? Because we made that a real number, and these will always be numbers in my spreadsheet. Now I can do things, bring me back every task less than 2049 as an example, and actually have a valid criteria there. So that's the power of your data types there. And again, you could fix that later. You could toggle that and then switch that into pick lists where you can quickly go through and pick. So you got your users have their choices of how they want to analyze that data. They can also drag and drop and start to group like that. And of course, export and print and do all that kind of fun stuff. Now that's one interaction. The other thing they can do, they can zoom into that particular widget. And when I zoom into it, I can see the chart. I can see the raw data. I can get to the raw data for export purposes. I can get to the chart. If I do the chart, I can take it out as an image file. But I also have that prompt panel. Remember we talked about that prompt panel? And that allows me as a user to come in and say, well, show me just last month. That should just bring me February. It's going to look like a really weird chart, but you'll see now I just got dots for February. So I've got a dynamic ability to pick time ranges, and I could have done that as a between date. Let's do this entire quarter, which actually should give me back the same kind of result as I had before. So you've got that kind of power. And then on the dashboard side, the user, if they wanted to see a particular this month or this quarter or something like that every single time, they have the ability to go in and do what we call clear save prompts or refresh prompts. And what that allows them to do is not have that default setting that the dashboard builder gave them, but they can say, every time I see this report, even though it's going to show me a full year's worth of information, I want to see this quarter only. And I want you to remember that value so that the next time I load my dashboard, that's saved as a personal preference for me. And that's, again, some of that power of the interactive dashboard for that user. So hopefully you can kind of see how fast we went from importing to massaging the data to building reports. Now, run a little slow on time. Let me pop in quickly, see if there's any Q&A there. No, great. So if you have any after the fact, please let me know. I'm going to do one more thing in this webinar, and then we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to show you how to refresh that data, because it's great that I'm able to do this one time, but what happens the next time? What happens when I get new data? How do I get that updated within Yurbi? So I'm going to go back to my initial spreadsheet. So we're going to use this as this becomes your template at that point. Every time you want to update that data in Yurbi, you're going to use this same structure. You don't want to go in and change and add new columns, change the labels, do anything like that. If you do need to do that, then we've got to update that database definition that we created, and we got to go through a different process. This becomes your template at that point. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy just let's copy 4 records. Well, that's 5. That's okay. And I'm just going to change the dates on these to be April. Now remember, we set that chart up to look for 12 months worth of data. So by me adding in April on this, I should get new elements there. And I'm going to just, again, delete some extra rows just in case I accidentally added something. Let's save this. I don't have to touch anything else in the spreadsheet because all these tables were just referential. If I don't have new managers, new statuses, or new tasks, that's kind of done. I leave that alone. I'm just adding into that. Now, the thing I want you to notice is I added to the bottom of this list. So I kept all my original data in here. I didn't have to do that, but I'll show you that as we do this import process. So I've got the month of April now added into that particular report. Let's go back into the Yurbi. The architect is the only one that can update the data. So again, updating data is kind of important. It's not important as creating data sources, so it's not an admin feature, but you can identify somebody in your organization to be the architect who can update the data source. Let's pop back into our app, our task database, and you'll see a little icon right here. Every one of your Excel CSV apps will have that icon there. If it's an actual database, you won't see that there. And I'm going to click on that, and you'll see that it looks very similar to how we first uploaded, but it's got a couple extra fields on it. The big ones being I can append or I can replace. And that's going to be the determination if you want to keep all your history of data in the spreadsheet. If you're going to do that and just add new stuff to the bottom, then you're going to do a replace. So all the data is replaced every time you upload. That's really great as well if you need to go back and do reconciliation and you need to update historical data. It's a really easy way to update stuff without having to get into the database to change it. The other method is if I just wanted that spreadsheet to have the month of April and nothing else but the header row in the month of April, then I would append. And you could do either one. So if I recommend that you keep a master spreadsheet of everything, but if you want to keep it simple and just upload the new month stuff, you do that. The reason you keep that master is it's going to make it very easy to correct anything if you have some historical data change. In this case, I'm going to do a replace. I'm going to choose the file, and I do have a header row. Still important to pick that in there. And I'm going to upload that. I'm going to hit the finish button, and you'll see that it'll still pop that up. We don't have to do anything at this point because it's already saved in the database. I'm just going to process that, and it's going to upload all my new data. And I just refreshed that data. And if I now come over to my library, if I did build that chart properly, let's run that chart, and let's bring back everything. It's forward, yeah, it's in the future, so it might actually, I think, there it is, April. You'll see that April is now represented in that. I have to go back and look and see if I actually did set my chart up properly. Let's actually go into the chart wizard. Again, I don't have to be a builder to set my chart up properly. I can go through here and work with the chart. You know what I did? I changed the wrong value. The 4 should have become a 12, not that 3 there. That was representing 3 rows. So somebody who knows Excel probably caught me do that incorrectly, but that's the mistake I made on that particular cell settings. And now you'll see my April represented in there. Notice what I just did. I didn't actually have to go to the builder. Now, this is just for this user session. It's not going to save. So to correct the problem, I've got to edit this report, go back into the builder and fix it. But that's the power of Yurbi, is that even your regular view-only users have the ability to work with that data set. Because I saw that April was in my data set now, I was able to set that chart up the way I wanted. And now all that functionality we set up, the drill down capabilities and everything, if I were to click here, all that stuff just works naturally. I don't have to do anything else with the setup of the reports. All I do now every week, month, day, however often you want to upload that data, is just do that, and all my dashboards are set up perfectly for my end users. So hopefully that gave you the full life cycle. The next step, as I mentioned, would probably be at that point to automate that process, so you can even get rid of the need to manually import your Excel. I like to say that you should take a look and validate that everything is working properly before you go to automation. But once you have everything working properly, then automate that Excel. And there's a couple ways you could do that. You can use the VBA programming I talked about and do direct database inserts. You could build a structure where you drop it into a folder on the server and have a server process take over and import that. I mean, you could, if the Excel is coming from a database, you can connect Yurbi directly to that database. So lots of ways to automate that we could talk about. All right, that's it. I hope I did run a little bit longer, but we're right on time. So I just want to point out that if you do have any questions or answers, I don't see any in the Q&A. So I hope everybody was able to follow everything that I said. If you're watching the replay and you have a question, just email me, david.for. I'll put my email up again in a second. But go check out yurbi.com. We're going to do a lot more webinars. We do have a deep dive coming on security. We're doing some more partner-oriented webinars that you might be interested in if you are a potential partner of ours. Or an existing partner. So always check there. And then again, always follow us on our social media accounts, because that's where we're going to put a lot of that information out there. And there's my email address if you do have any questions. I would encourage you, if you have Yurbi installed and you haven't played with Excel, try it, set it up. It does take a lot. It's licensed like a data source. So all your users that need access to that data would need a valid user access license. And we can talk about licensing if you need to increase your licensing to support more of that use case. If you're new, start a trial. Everything you saw me do today, you can replicate in the trial against your own data. Again, I hope you enjoyed this, and this provided some value, and it's right at the top of the hour. So I want to appreciate your time and attention, and definitely check back our next couple of webinars and sign up for those if you're interested as well. Have a great day, and we will talk to you the next time.